So, are you an empath who finds it really hard to set boundaries with others? Do you always have compassion for the other person, even when they've really hurt you? And perhaps you've experienced a toxic relationship yourself. Now, in this podcast, I'm going to talk about my own experience of dating a narcissist and the valuable lessons I have learned. Now, I'm Harriet Frew. This is the Eating Disorder Therapist podcast. I've worked for 20 plus years in this field, personally recovered from bulimia. Thank you so much for being here. Do check out my Food Freedom app if you're interested for more support. So let's dive in. So the time I dated a narcissist, let's really explore these 7 lessons on the other side. So I don't generally talk much about relationships, but with the passing of time, metabolizing my emotions and experiencing healing, I've got a few things to share about this. Now, today I can really talk about it with clarity, wisdom, and self-awareness because I have untangled the deeper lessons. Now, you may relate. So I think many people with eating disorders and disordered eating are often huge empaths and find it very hard to set boundaries with others. So you might relate to some of the things that I'm going to share here. Now, I had a relationship with a man possessing narcissistic tendencies for around 18 months. And it was one of the trickiest relationships I have ever been in. And when I emerged fresh from the trenches of that dalliance, I was still knee-deep in self-blame and shame. Thankfully, though, I didn't ever live with a narcissist. I didn't have my children with them, thank God, or spend huge quantities of time in their presence. So what a saving grace this was, and infinitely it reduced the overall impact. So I'm very grateful for that. But nevertheless, the experience has given me a lot of lessons, some of the most impactful in my whole life. And I'm so grateful for that. So let's dive into the 7 learnings I have found. Number 1, daddy issues. Now, I have had my own daddy issues in the past. I own this. But the narcissist experience did sideline me. I'd had several relationships before, not always with the most compatible partners, but overall they were caring, straightforward people. They were fundamentally honest, kind people. Now, this relationship journey highlighted how anyone can be susceptible to these tricky dynamics and how the warning signs can be far more subtle than expected. Now, my relationship template with men was not rooted in nourishing soil. My dad was emotionally abusive, and my wound of not good enough was open and deep when I started this relationship. Now, if you have daddy issues, the draw towards emotionally unavailable partners is often magnetic. It feels normal to work for approval, navigate unpredictable relational dynamics, and strive to please. And it can even feel weirdly satisfying to gratify the hard-to-please person. It's like a job well done. And a calm, stable relationship can feel boring, underwhelming in comparison. In contrast, the drama and unpredictability of the unemotionally unavailable partner can feel strangely safe. Now, chaos and cortisol are the baseline of normality with this, and you'll always be more vulnerable to this kind of relationship if you're drawn to that drama. If you have daddy issues, you're likely as well to be anxiously attached. That was certainly true of me in the past, whereas someone with more secure attachment, with a calm and regulated nervous system, would identify the red flags, blowing vividly from day one, and they would step away. So the narcissist was compelling and familiar to me. So number 2, the empath and the narcissist, the magnetism. So my empathy and my warmth are my superpowers. And I'm grateful for these. I get to use them daily in my therapist role and in many of my close and wonderful relationships. And you know what? Mostly my empathy has led me to beautiful connections and emotional depth with others. But empathy without boundaries isn't helpful, maybe even verging on pathological empathy when it becomes harmful and destructive to the self. Now, I struggled through much of my early life to set boundaries and hold them firm. Because what would happen is I would set a boundary and it would activate that inner child guilt and shame inside me. And that would feel unbearable. And I would feel such compassion and understanding towards the other person, leading me to tolerate all manner of unacceptable behavior. So I'd regularly allow boundaries to be overstepped and abandon myself. And I was then angry and resentful inwardly, but this felt easier to tolerate than living with the unbearable guilt. So I carried an unhealthy and inappropriate weight of responsibility for others. I was codependent and prone to fixing. I didn't take responsibility for myself and clarify my own needs and safe limits. Now, to a narcissist, the empath is a delightfully perfect match because the empath wants to pour out energy in pleasing and gratifying, while the narcissist desires admiration and attention, thirstily absorbing all of the empath's energy. It's a seductive, dysfunctional match. The empath feels great, forgiving, at least to begin with, and the narcissist receives a huge supply of appreciation, support, and elevation. Okay, number 3, love bombing. So previously I'd read about the concept of love bombing, but it seemed such an obvious, flamboyant act that could easily be identified and sidestepped. But love bombing can be far more subtle. Now, I didn't experience lavish gifts, marriage proposals, and grandiose promises. Instead, it was far more subtle, seductive, and compelling. Now, the narcissist was charming, witty, and interesting. And this always drew me back because the conversations were stimulating and fascinating, sharing of songs and poetry whilst creating this world between you where it felt special and enticing. And he was generous with compliments, at least early on. And it was a spotlight of adoration to the center of my core, illuminating parts of me I didn't feel that had existed. Now, the narcissist was also attentive and reliable in some forms of communication. So the daily admiring texts, shared anecdotes, also the ability to share emotional insight and intellectual thoughts with charm and warmth. Now, it felt like a delicious, fuzzy emotional cocktail that I hadn't tasted before. Now, this dynamic was compelling at first. It tapped into my inner little girl who was not delighted in or appreciated by her dad. It was intoxicating to feel this male infatuation. And we only met monthly due to geographical distance. So this increased the limerence and the obsession. Naturally, the time spent together was a honeymoon whirlwind of Fantasyland, and it was relatively easy to maintain for brief bouts of time, but it was not real life. Number 4, the confusion, the wolf in sheep's clothing. Now, the danger flags were really flying vividly early on. Even 3 weeks in, I remember feeling a deep unease and something felt off. But it was not enough to burst the bubble, though. The push-pull dynamics were obvious too. We would spend intense time together and then not meet again for a while. We would communicate daily, but often very superficially, never moving beyond more surface topics. So the relationship never became a proper relationship. It was always undefined and in situationship territory. And alcohol was a thing. When we met, he was always drinking, not always to excess, but it was a necessary crutch. So it sort of kept the relationship in that hedonistic zone. And the relationship was deeply confusing. It felt like emotional presence and warmth, but without the sharing of vulnerabilities or anything real. Now, narcissists as well are very emotionally perceptive, but they cannot do empathy. So it always felt that the potential of realness was just one compelling step away. Words were expressed, but actions were different. Daily text contact, a brief phone call, just enough dates. It felt like the possibility, always a hint from the narcissist about the potential of where things could go. And it was seductive. It felt like having the first course of a meal repeatedly, though you never reached the main course or dessert. But the first course was delicious and full of promise. And the hedonistic, playful, and fun interactions were intensely enjoyable. But this became frustrating over time. In the dynamic, it felt impossible to shift things in a different direction. Any move towards emotional conversation or clarity was smoothly dodged and avoided. So the outer presence was warm, but I sensed a deep lack of safety if I pushed further. Now, I tolerated this and I learned to skirt around the issues. This was familiar territory for me. I kept the peace, I squashed down my needs, I chose to walk on eggshells. Now, I perpetuated the problem by doing this. Number 5, my intuition. Now, several times in the relationship, I broke it off. Now, I have strong intuition. I can sense when something isn't right. I really feel it strongly. I wanted more. I wanted emotional connection and authenticity. I knew that the alcohol was a problem. I knew that he wasn't fully present for me. I knew that we were in situationship territory and we didn't have a label. And I could sense that his energy was directed elsewhere, but I didn't hold my boundary and often went back because of the kind of good bits. Because then as well, when I doubted myself, I felt I was the problem. And of course, I had my role in all of this. I tended to blame as well my anxious attachment style. Maybe I was just too needy, I was too emotional. And he would always pursue me after the breakups. And I would then question myself and think, maybe it's me. He must like me, has so much more faith in us. He knows better. I used to just really abandon myself. And then we would cycle through the same old pattern again. So initially, love bombing and the intoxication of being reunited. Then me asking for more and his words seeming promising. The action never materializing and his subsequent emotional withdrawal and distance. Thankfully, because our relationship was long distance and navigated mostly in fantasy land, I didn't get to experience many of the emotionally abusive costs that people experience because the relationship never really got into real life. It was emotionally damaging, but it could have been infinitely worse. And this was a blessing, but it also fueled the unrealistic, limerent dream of the relationship potential. It lasted around 18 months and we only met in person around 12 times. Number 6, blowing up everything. When I finally stood firmly in my frame and set boundaries with a determined calmness and clarity, and I followed through, I experienced the full force of the narcissistic impact. The narcissist flipped into intense rage and lashing out. Now, this hadn't been the first display of this, but this was elevated to another level. Now, in truth, it was shocking, but truly not that surprising. My intuition always sensed this wolf beneath the charming sheep, and I'd been walking on eggshells to avoid this darker, treacherous side. And it was only then that I truly understood what was beneath that whole glossy veneer. And I received, a bombardment of photos with him, with other women, along with punishing taglines, grandiose comments. And there was no remorse, no regret, no empathy. And I genuinely think he felt justified. He didn't sort of recognize that his philandering, his cheating, his lying was a problem, or he chose not to. There was no sense of responsibility at all and no value of the relationship that I thought we had. And it was substantial grief at the time because I realized that he didn't really care about me. He cared about how I made him feel, but not about me personally. And as I withdrew, he was rageful of his personal loss. Now, I played my own role in all of this. I had been compliant and willing member to this toxic dance, somehow trying to fill a void in myself that craved validation and recognition. Now, I had tolerated something that was intolerable on repeat. I'd kept going back, but I did leave and I moved on. So let's talk about moving on. Number 7. It takes time to heal from this type of relationship. And it's quite hard for others to understand unless they've experienced something similar. The push-pull is quite unique. And the end of the relationship is just one marker on the healing road because the longer-term impact and rumination of thoughts is ongoing. And there's also a tendency to romanticize happy moments and to question yourself. And, it absolutely forced me to dig deep and really do some necessary healing. Because for a while, although I knew it was right to leave, I would analyze and play over the past events and the replaying of old scenarios, the recognizing of the lies, the inconsistencies. Suddenly all the reality was just shot. And my questioning of, what was my role in it all? Many times I hadn't believed he was a narcissist. I justified and smoothed over the inconsistencies. But today I have healed and I'm on the other side, well on the other side. And ultimately, this was one of life's most valuable lessons to me so far. And it was a humbling process of self-awareness and owning my wounds, because someone with a healthy self-concept and self-esteem doesn't attract a narcissist. They would quickly remove themselves with grace. But the experience taught me to value my needs, my emotions, and to listen to myself. It taught me to be brave and to communicate clearly. It taught me to tolerate the disapproval of others and to not abandon myself in the process, and to accept with grace and compassion that some people cannot be what I need. They're just not able to give me what I need. But it's my responsibility to walk away and not stay for the potential of a relationship. So I send peace and love to the narcissist. He taught me lessons that I needed to learn. I was an empath with no boundaries. And I know that deep down, he's in pain, he's probably struggling. He's navigating his perceived terror of reality with his limited tools. But I have moved on, much wiser for it. Thank you. Do you relate? Let me know. Do share in the comments. I would love to hear from you. Thank you so much for being here, for listening and watching the Eating Disorder Therapist podcast. Do subscribe on YouTube for more videos. Thank you so much. Do follow, rate, and review if you're listening on Apple or Spotify. Do check out my Food Freedom app if you're looking for more support. And I look forward to sharing another episode with you very soon. Bye for now.